Hey,
Hey mate,
Dr. Jubb.
yeah, I reckon it would be good for us to do this podcast in sections a bit. Yeah, one thing is, of course, for exceptional brain function, nobody has considered the importance of metabolism itself. And many of these conditions aren't um, impacted or helped much by people only thinking that a neurotransmitter is something, because you've got blood glucose regulation, and it's supposed to be around 82 milligrams per deciliter, and you've got islands of Langerhans, which produce, in the alpha cells, you have glucagon produced, and then you've got, where you've got low blood pressure, low blood sugar. And when you've got high blood sugar there, insulin would be released by the beta cells there. And everything you and I, it happens for us automatic. And it's kind of what you and I do where we are with our diet and things that can impact things and help someone recover the most. Yeah. And and we could talk a bit, perhaps we could, in our podcast, some examples of how someone is helped so much actually as a result of this. But into it and toward this, you're going to be picking up some things which is extremely important for exceptional brain function. And blood glucose regulation is very important. And how can that be if a condition exists of cystic fibrosis, which you could look more into, but it's just a neurotransmitter deficiency in the cell membrane, which causes it not to be able to process bicarbonate and a chloride molecule. And because of that, then you have material being released more, and the cause of more mucus and things is like that. And where somebody eats complex carbs and heavy carb with protein and put a lot of fat with that as well, which would be pretty common, sort of like a meal today. It always doesn't get digested in a normal manner, but it can only get digested as it could or would be. But the stomach registers that this is a combination which is a bit over the top. And so what it decides to do is to release somatostatin by the delta cells of the islands of Langerhans, which inhibits insulin and glucagon and also pituitary hormone in your brain. And limiting, like what we would in our work in Jubb cell rejuvenation, neoplasm and things just like that, for the brain, for instance, you can see that if cold exists and brown fat is activated by glucagon, you've got energy sort of happening properly. But when those brown cells, fat cells, are inhibited, which they sure are where somatostatin is released, where a meal would have been eaten that was complex carbs, fat and heavy protein combined. And no matter what, this is sort of a diphasic type of a meal because it takes time for that to actually have some effect. And the fatty acid that comes from it then has to go through a glycolysis or glucogenolysis, which is where protein and lipids and things like that get broken down into glycogen. And so that's stored, and so that could be released to increase blood sugar, but only is as a result of glucagon, released by the alpha cells, in your pancreas. And somatostatin is a hormone which is released otherwise where somebody's eaten a dead food combo. And the delta cells of the islands of Langerhorn release somatostatin, and it blocks and stops everything from working. So you don't have glucagon, certainly not. You don't have insulin either. You're not really accessing anything from the pituitary gland, and so human growth hormone isn't produced. And so this is sort of what a non-thriving state is. And so quietening all internal dialogue down to zero, of course, is something which goes on where exceptional brain function is. And as you've got good blood sugar regulation and things like that, you could really limit most conditions, and you can help correct metabolism instead and keep a focus on what this is, rather than having thought, oh yeah, this is neurotransmitters and a whole range of other things, because it isn't. It's all the protein and the fat and the heavy carbs all combined and chomped up, and probably not broken down as well as what it can, truly triggers somatostatin, and that blocks the brown fat cells, which we start to talk a bit about. Those brown fat cells really burn energy, and the brown fat really is triggered by cold, and cold at night more, and cold exposes and compete a competition a bit more for hydrogen and fat and also protein. And so the cold effect really is worthwhile where something is. And people should go through some small extremes a bit and that sort of thing, and it helps build this. And our product that we have helps because it is all these heat and cold shock protein which goes on. But cold mild really shows clear activation of the brown fat cells at night when you sleep, and otherwise those brown fat cells aren't really being activated. And people could have had various tests and shown that tissue was a bit more thicker in places than it should be, and that have got sort of tumours. And all of this gets all cleared up just because you decide to make sure that it's more cool when you're sleeping, where you're sleeping, and it reduces all the extraneous material and starves all the tumour more as a result of it. And on a program, you're really not having much methionine and glutathione. And these are the only amino acids which trigger neoplastic condition to grow. And on a live food diet, you're really just missing the bean and any flesh, and otherwise everything combines pretty good. Otherwise, somatostatin is certain where anyone else's diet is, and that really truly increases metabolic disorder. And so how about exceptional brain function after that? You've got mitochondrial disorders and hyperactive deficit attention disorders. Is really a whole body communication sort of need to be fixed, otherwise it's a bit of a breakdown. And looking at it just like, oh yeah, you've got to have catecholamine and this sort of a thing is totally wrong. Somebody could have an approach more for whole brain functioning, of course, and the behavioural patterns that allow us to live more in the whole of ourselves and be learning like more what patterning exists like this, though we've just been talking a little bit about how the island of Langerhorn has the ability to be able to produce glucagon or not, and if somatostatin was there, it shuts all of that down so it doesn't function. And this is a story just a bit ongoing. But these alpha cells which would produce glucagon, it really does so where sugar really has gone below 80 milligrams per deciliter, and then hyperglycemia, which is above 120 milligrams per deciliter, it sort of really is where the body will start to have some need for insulin. And live food causes a modulation of that. So there's really not any need for anything. In fact, it has glucagon and it has everything in it to actually digest itself. Versus a lot of things are going to be pretty dead. You've got to actually focus on getting something from your body and this sort of thing. And life food is really attention to enzyme a bit, but low phosphate, low methionine, and prepared in a way that makes things easy to digest. Otherwise, insulin has to be raised to absolutely absorb sugar, and glucose to pyruvate, and acetylcholine A to citric acid to get adenosine triphosphate energy. And this sort of a thing is a path. And potassium and magnesium all build up inside the cell and reduces its capacity to be polarized or to become depolarized. And the membrane becomes kind of depolarized in itself, or it's left in a depolarized state. So it can't change itself. It doesn't have as proper conditioning to have proper magnetic dynamic current. And calcium sensitivity and stone in the tissue, right through the connective tissue of the body, in the heart, the pancreas, the brain, or leaves behind this metabolic disorder, which really is rife. And it all starts because, like, you've got stone in the pancreas is really something. So when glucose is up and ATP is up because you've got fatty acids in the stomach having to be broken down, and you've only got that pathway because the stomach is just shut down because the combination of the food that was eaten caused somatostatin to be released, which triggered fatty acids to have to be sort of broken down to glucose to get some sort of energy. And this is truly disastrous overall. What it requires to be able to function more, to get glucagon to function a bit, is all sorts of behavioral patterns of raising epinephrine and norepinephrine. And so risky types of all sorts of gambling and all sorts of things gets engaged and involved behavior-wise. And that stimulates glucagon up to a certain degree, and cholecystokinin and secretin and these neurotransmitters and things. And it stimulates glucagon through that pathway. But primary stimulus really producing pro-glucagon is really ribosomes in your endoplasmic reticulum, and that then travel through and get modified more by the Golgi apparatus, and you have glucagon being released by a cell. And under life food circumstances, this is something which is easy to have done. Otherwise, so many conditions could be corrected that you can just block and stop all the sediment and stop all the high phosphate and high methionine that would have come in. And on life food, just because you're just not eating any flesh and bean, everything all sort of combines relative. You've got a bit of a focus more on the enzyme, and you're going to achieve incredibleness because the bits that would have caused stone to form have sort of been cleared away, and then what stone is in the body could be dissolved. Calcium otherwise always is causing a protein fusing under circumstance of fatty acids always being pathwayed to get glucose, and all of that combo heavy protein, carb, fat meal that triggered somatostatin to be released. It really was a cause of glucagon not to be produced, you see. So otherwise, yeah, sure, glucagon is being produced. And you have ATP that comes up and pyruvates, and you get a bit more potassium, and you have but if you've got things going on which is just fatty acids that could be broken down, because that's what the consistency was from the stomach having to be shut down and then all that material being broken down in that way. you're building up a positive charge inside, and this all sort of really blocks calcium, basically. And so the cells become sort of deficient, and somebody becomes hypoglycemic, and they're not able to actually cause their blood sugar state to go up, except for, oh, I've got to have something, and then and then I'll be fine. And it's the fasting state that we're talking about here. Fastation is really the science of what goes on where it's a post-absorptive state, meaning a state that's after the absorptive state. You've got brown fat cells in our story here, which get stimulated by cold shock protein. And these are the things which is found in our formulas and things. And a true you could say therapeutic ratification is that something had occurred in the past, and perhaps what anybody did wasn't the proper path, but this, like what we're talking about now, is maybe a better path for you to follow, where you're looking into the idea that if you correct metabolism, you're going to correct a lot of neurological and behavioural disorders as well. And behind everything is sort of like that consumption, and persons cannot even have considered those things. But glycogenolysis really is stopped via somatostatin release in the story. A neoplastic condition otherwise gets cleared away because glycogen gets turned on, and brown fat cells, are used. And all this activates protein kinase and hormone-sensitive lipase, which helps break fatty acids down. And you've got a triglyceride that comes about, and you've got a glycerol molecule and a fatty acid, like we're talking. And this enzyme has to be gone through that pathway where somebody's eaten just a dead food diet, not live food. And the carbs won't stimulate somatostatin. It doesn't, but when combined with heavy protein and fat, you're going to have that mixed meal sort of raise somatostatin more than what should be. And somatostatin 28 sort of really is a substance which inhibits the endocrine and exocrine glands and things like this. And so you've got these hormones, of course, somatostatin and prosomatostatin, and these things all block gastrin and ghrelin, which is so important for, metabolism and the regulation of food intake and things. Being in more balance when somebody does more live food and eat once a day, basically. And insulin, glucagon, human growth hormone, and thyroid stimulating hormone, all of those things is blocked on a mixed dead food diet. And that leads to stone formation and all sorts of fat intolerance as stone gets built up in the pancreas, and reduces the gastric acid and stops proper gut motility. Somatostatin really excess, where a protein fat dense carbo meal was with bean and starch, and most vegans are starchaholics and carbotarians, and eating excessive amounts of heavy protein and fats where their meal is, and this reduces their kidney function and this sort of thing. So somatostatin, where that's raised, it reduces memory formation, and so you're talking about exceptional brain function. You're really not caring too much to have somatostatin release. So otherwise, reduced gastric acid and enzyme and all of its delayed gastric emptying and the loss of efficiency in digestion is really a partial breakdown, all of that material into diglycerides and fatty acids. And this blocks water magnolytic homeostasis in the body. Stomach acid really is general at around about 5 o'clock, or a bit before this and after. Stomach acid is pretty much at its highest and it's where food is eaten out of time, out of turn, and it's too much and not enough substance to break it down, and this sort of a thing. You've got food which is pretty dead and non-enzymatically active too much. And so this is the reason why something like Rejuve or this Gouda and different things which are aged over time, which have free-formed amino acids in it, are so important. Like the almond Gouda cheese that we have, it's got phenylalanine and hydrolase and things like this, which really help protect someone from fetal ketonuria. And we've got gene chromosomes and things also like this also be protected on live food, but otherwise you've got genes that are not too protected, and you've got these saturated, and you've got these diglycerides and fatty acid high where somebody's eating a dead food diet, and so what's epigenetic in that is that it deletes the phenylalanine amino acid, and that deletion disrupts sort of proper protein folding. And where a lot of rock salt was and water, somatostatin really blocks phenylalanine, and then that causes like a very thick and more sticky mucus. But it's a metabolic disorder, and it's amino acids are really like nucleic acid metabolism, where the mitochondria and protein metabolism has to be. It's slow but sure causes this cystic fibrotic state because it's not a pathway general that we would be using for energy. So where things are cooked and it really just is devoid of any enzyme in it at all, most of that really is enzyme resistant, and these are the very things which cause cystic fibrotic sorts of symptoms. But just, you could imagine that's the phenylalanine deficiency and malabsorption of phenylalanine and production of phenylalanine, which is the reason for the Jubb's Gouda almond cheese, because it impacts liver function the most. Phenylalanine, tryptophan, and tyrosine. You have leucine and proline, and all of these not being present, dipeptide, and this pathway of fatty acids having been produced, and that sort of thing really disrupts. And that causes lung types of cystic fibrotic types of conditions as well. Then you've got dead food consumption always raising somatostatin, like we've been talking about. This really blocks human growth hormone. Like, how can you have any more protein synthesis after this? You can't. And glucagon also. So what's going to go on? Yeah, you're going to have low blood sugar, and you're going to be walking around and often just about falling asleep in a day where you are. And you've got this 508 FO8 DEL gene, which is a cystic fibrotic sort of transfer factor of amino acid missing to transport a bicarbonate and a chloride molecule, and nobody could say that's not the biggest condition that impacts people. And iatrogenic salt drowning from unphysiological salt being given to people is a very reason for edema and everything, which later on in a short moment ever would cause septicemia, which is those are the very things that actually happen where people are in hospital because they just hooked up automatic to an unphysiological salt, which Jubb plasma it should be, which is what should be dehydrated if something existed, like they have to have done such. But otherwise, the unphysiological salts, just like rock salt and heavy metal and things, can't be shifted out of a cell where somebody's got cystic fibrotic type of state, and it causes an ever more thickened mucus in the brain and the pancreas. And how could you have proper function after this, you see? So the impact of mood and on our cognition and its automatic function and reduced grey matter. We talked just a bit about where somebody could have had a test and they did the glucose and then they watched how much the cells came back toward where it should, and the T2 sort of relaxation value that they got from the test showed there was a lot of thick and more material where the brain was. And this was an absolute certain that cognitive impairment and degrees of hypoxia where the brain is to function properly. So all drugs which cause people to have antihistamine types of effect on the brain or create much more Alzheimer's types of condition. With cystic fibrosis we're talking about a whole range of things that happen, like POTS, which is a postural orthostatic tension syndrome, where somebody's blood is shunted from their legs up to their thoracic area and head, and to do that you've got a pulmonary hypertension to do it, and that's sort of an effect of having eaten foodstuffs which really has raised somatostatin and could be impacted the most by correcting this condition. A heart rate increase where someone goes to stand up and their leg blood flow sort of all of a sudden shuts down, cause someone to sort of feel fainted or a bit fatiguey. And we know they go to walk off, they could feel a little bit of a loss of balance. But that's postural orthostatic tachycardia, sorts of where it suddenly could cause heart palpitations and things. But raised blood pressure and hypovolemia and the deconditioning and that sort of thing, which has gone on, and hyperandrogenetic sorts of states. You have malnutrition, poor healing, you've got brain fog, you've got fatigue and depression. And where somebody could have had conditions in the past like encephalitis and these sorts of things, they're much more prone to be impacted by a cystic fibrotic condition. And most people could have, cystic conditions where pain is, where joints and muscle pain is, stomach distension always, general from gas, really blurred vision and not really much exercise is possible, and the hands and the feet and this sort of thing, and skin start to look a bit more purple and more jaundiced and more yellow around the gills sort of thing. But it's really phenylalanine deficiency, and this really causing a postural orthostatic tachycardia or tension syndrome. And it's never not but always you could see that B12 deficiency, is part of all of that. Are you with me, mate, still?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, a lot of people have hair loss, isn't it? They come to you and they're bothered because they got hair loss. Yeah, this affects them, like what we were just talking about. Change around your diet and you're not going to have any more hair loss. But otherwise, you've got visual challenges will go on where that is. Things are going to end up more sort of diarrhea-like, and food stuff's not really being broken down because it's not a stool which suspends itself in the water, but it either bobs on top or it sinks. And it doesn't break apart with any disturbance of the water, which is a non-mucoid stool. It's either a semi or a mucoid type of a stool, and it really shows a non-thriving oxidative types of stressed status, and shows even more the possibilities of aerobic glycolysis being as a pathway being used, and that's what neoplasm is really. And dysautonomia is really where your automatic nervous system is unable to function properly. So sympathetic and parasympathetic don't function much because it's got a vagal enteric nervous system break above it, which is what we're talking about here, which is the vagal nerve and the 11th to the 5th cranial nerve in your brain. And postural orthostatic tension syndrome and dizziness and a loss of blood flow, I think, being treated with beta blockers and with amphetamine and benzodiazepine and things like this is really terrible. because those drugs can't be broken down and never cause more dementia. And it's not the cause of the condition, which what we're talking about here now really is. So where people have just been given excessive unphysiological salts, just administered non-stop, and who ever thought about that? No, they're not real. And everybody could have been given about up to maybe 6 grams a day because that's sort of acceptable, apparent. But when somebody's got cystic fibrosis, that's sort of something that really builds up, and it really increases the vascular lung water and edema between the cells. And don't tell me that that's not going to cause your brain to not function. It sure isn't. But if you follow life food, you get onto instructions that's more about life food, you're going to clear away this idea that you've got a condition which could have caused ever more sepsis. Because after a moment, congestion exists, and what's going to happen is a fermentation of glutamine and glutamate and glutathione and methionine, and this is all just like spike protein city, and it's the very fuel which neoplastic cells need to function properly. And so on a life food diet, you just stop all that, so it clears away all the neoplastic cells as a result of it. So hyperhydration, where an unbalanced crystalloid tissue is with unphysiological salt built up, really is going to cause edema, meaning holding water in between the tissue. And so the cause of high central nervous system sort of pressure and headache and things just like this, having a salt rub and having the ability to both sweat stuff out, getting rid of 5G from being around your body if you've got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on and stuff, which you shouldn't, where sleep is. Phone should be in another room, where sleep is. But so many things could help correct things like life food and the process of a radiant, energetic dynamo and radiant warmth and far infrared and things, and combining the science more of this, you've really got a great depolarization of what's critical, and you and I, we could change that around so the cell membrane can function again properly. Otherwise, it's an influx of that positive sodium and less negative to positive type of interaction instead, and depolarized type of a state. And so where a magnetolysis is, it can't sort of really function, if you could imagine that. And so the north negative in a chloride and in a bicarbonate isn't properly transported. And then this is really disastrous overall, because the cell can't quite get rid of whatever that is that gets into itself, like calcium wrong, sodium wrong. And as that has to be excreted, which it is, it just thickens up the water on the outside of the cell and causes it to have more a mucus type of condition. And it causes dopaminergic types of conditions through the body, including the brain, of hyperfusion, meaning excessive sort of conditioning, or hyperfusion, which means not enough proper conditioning magnetically for dynamic current and things, and static balance where you are in the brain and the body. And so this story really starts out with the beta cells and the pancreas remaining in a hyperpolarized state as well, where glucose is low, potassium and sodium influx goes into the cell, and it's going to cause cognitive impairment. You see? And so who's talking about this? You should, because it's the very reason behind all sorts of behavioral challenges that people have, basic and cognitive processing as well, which a lot of that stuff you can see all gets cleared up. Somebody can book a session. You're just like only having a session for half an hour, but you're getting a hypnotic program and getting onto track. And is it that you're interested more in a non-druggist, non-surgical approach to help healing? Because that's what this is. I mean, most of the conditions, no matter what, you've got peripheral neuropathy and you've got increased grey density in tissue, and these scans and stuff can show that. And you've got mood regulation and anxiety and depression and hypoxia, inflammation, and fluid dynamics in sort of more hydrocephalus types of condition. And so you've got minerals, there's 92 trace elements in Jubb Gouda, at almond Gouda, and it incredibly give you all the phenylalanine that's absorbed by the jejunum and things. You really don't have a high methionine, and you've got modest amount of tryptophan. And all of this really is absorbed so beautiful because you've really got everything as nutrient, which has got its proper zeta potential, meaning that it can pass through another field without being affected itself. You could see juices being suspended more where the sediment, it doesn't, form sediment and fall to the bottom relative. In the time frame that's more within itself suspended, it's got its zeta potential, but otherwise over time it sort of loses that. And if you oxidize nutrients and things like this, it's really, the zeta potential no longer is really kept like it should be. But copper, iron, zinc, manganese, white gold, all only clathrate to an aromatic amino acid, and without that aromatic amino acid, you really don't have the function of these things. So this is a reason why rhodium, osmium, and ruthenium can be brought in, and it overrides the magnetic dynamic condition that would be where cyanide is. And so people could be survived well and truly where you've got substances like this. So it's really much more in a finer range, and giving a conduction across the space, you see. And so it fits over the top of the material which could ordinarily cause death in the mitochondria like heavy metal would have, where we're talking just today about unphysiological salt, also cyanide, and also diastatic toxin. These are three toxins which could impact somebody's mitochondria for it not to function, but where you've got rhodium, osmium, and ruthenium, and you've got something coming in which is from live food or these product that what we have, you've got a voltage like between 1 and 4 volts that could be needed and shifted, and it really goes across and over the top of substances which would have caused a switching off otherwise, you see. So it's quite miraculous in what these products can do. Alanine and glucagon, which is really found lovely in this Gouda aged almond. You've got a mosaic of amino acid in the Jubb Gouda, which really is designed to help heal the body. Phenylalanine and there's phenyl rings, for instance. You've got tyrosine, these are the aromatic amino acids in the cheese, and you've got these phenyl rings, which is really like a carbon 5 and a hydrogen 6, and you've got hydroxyl groups and tryptophan that contain indole rings and this sort of thing, and benzene and pyrols. You've got somatostatin otherwise, which we'll be talking about, that would have inhibited all of that. And so how's a neurotransmitter going to help that? It doesn't. And so that's the reason why those things don't work. But this does, because if you block and stop somatostatin, you're going to have a better pattern. Otherwise, we've been just talking about it, but somatostatin inhibits gastric acid and hormones. It slows the gastric emptying. It reduces the exocrine and endocrine functioning. And therefore, it reduces the amount of blood plasma that anybody has in older people. And so this is really disastrous. And it can help be protected by getting a cystic fibrotic diagnosis. And now you can't have heavy metals, you can't have dead food and things like that. And everybody knows that the condition that you have is something manageable if you've got proper nutrients and things. And the answer is these proper nutrients, live food. Low methionine, low phosphate, attention to enzyme, plant-based. And so you don't have all the new toxin. But if you just only thought about modifying neurotransmission with a drug, you've got to have phenylalanine. And phenylalanine, like we're talking about, is really the substance that you need to be able to make dopamine, serotonin, and this sort of thing. But if that's not going on, because why? Because, well, you've got that all being suppressed by somatostatin and growth hormone not being produced, also thyroid stimulating hormone not really being produced either. And so you've got somatostatin, like we've been talking about, it inhibits the proper conditioning of food and the nutrients being broken down, causing a range of conditions which impact metabolism, and this impacting the brain. And then you've got a lot of material which might be broken down that if it's in a bean or flesh, which is prion material, and all of that prion material really is also sort of migrates to the places where conduction exists, and it's hyperactive and it is highly conductive and can cause, not a proper balance of neurotransmission like it should. And so you've got myoclonus, where you've got involuntary sort of muscle spasms. You've got ataxia, which is sort of various ranges of gait and walking disturbance. You've got contractions and pain and diarrhea, typical in bouts of what this is. And then you have memory loss and insomnia and bit delusion and disorientation, bit of slow speech, and pins and needles sort of is something which is not uncommon, sort of something which is talked about. But you've really got over 4,000 variations of this gene, and you've got epigenetic conditioning impacting this, cystic fibrotic transfer regulation going on in the membrane, which for Northern Europeans, they really have much higher chance of having impact of this, like what we're talking about, because we just talked and said that, when you have a high heavy protein with complex carbs and fat all mixed up together there, I mean, that's what you ate, it always will have raised somatostatin, and so you got your energy more through a fatty acid pathway. And that fatty acid pathway really impacts the rest of the body quite a bit. And if European ancestry is, you can have much more chance of having a condition. You've got degrees of class of conditions, like, between 1 to 5, for instance. You've got up the other end, you've got a 4 or 5, and it's sort of really a milder case of what this is that we're talking about. Otherwise, it's a very prevalent, and most and all Northern European, non-Hispanic sort of descent have a very high condition of this. So the most common cause of death is cystic fibrosis and conditions of this in pancreatic dysfunction. Nobody will say that no matter what the condition is, that the pancreas is a component of this function. And that, as we've been just talking about, is consumption itself. So you and I really have a negative sweat test, or you don't. That's a simple test to see, but somebody was just given salt and then just saw salt was in their saliva. But a quick one would be just looking at how thin the saliva is where anyone is. So a significant really brain structural changes will occur because histamine can't really be, and neurotransmitters which you really need to have good proper pattern recognition, and the brain being able to pick up like a stereogram, pick out the three-dimensional diagram that's within the pictogram and things. But otherwise, point mutation and frame shifting mutations are going on there where the genes are, where food stuff is, like that, acting upon the genes, epigenetically changing its punctuation. And so chromosomes sort of really large, uneven, ever small mutation. Then the F508del one, which maybe a bit more about in the literature, and how females are generally far worse than what males do, where this is as well. It really is impacting the digestive organs, and nobody's going to say that it's not quite a serious neurological function. You've got neurological tissue there which really is unable to clear itself of the excess sodium chloride, and so you have edema and various sorts of edema of the brain and a loss of consciousness and function. I mean, typically it's not uncommon, but these people have greasy, foul-smelling sort of stools and recurrent pancreatitis, like pain after eating, and the tummy doesn't really empty itself. You've got a lot of gas. Pancreatic mucus is blocking the ducts, and it's really worse than small respiratory types of conditions where someone maybe is now only breathing through their mouth and not through their nose. People are not paying attention to this. And so pulmonary hypertension is a condition that most people go to hospitals for, and they're getting medication for, which if you've got cystic fibrosis, the medication that you could be given really would be very counterproductive to this condition for sure. You're going to exacerbate it because you can't break down the heavy metals and things, you see, and you can't have any more toxin because it's the trouble with the body that it can't break toxin down. It's going to end up as a thick and sticky mucus, and already somebody has that, and so they've got not much energy. What's there to run the brain? And so you've got trouble maintaining weight or excess. You've got lack of energy, fluid build up in the abdomen. You've got the right side of the heart and things just like that. Somebody sort of feels pain when they exercise or go overboard more. You've got digestive issues, confusion, delirium, and nobody's going to say there's not mucus build-up. It's very similar to sort of asthma and celiac, where you've got immunodeficiency. You see, you've got gastroesophageal sorts of reflux, and which is showing you it's engaging multiple organs. You've got enzyme, you've got insulin resistance, that's for sure, and degrees of things that moving someone more towards type 2 diabetes. And so what would be the reason why somebody would focus on Jubb cell rejuvenation and move their diet more toward live food and learn about this? I think that it's really important what we've just been talking about. You've got pancreatic insufficiency, and that impacts most everyone. You've got cystic fibrotic sort of condition and cystic fibrosis, which really is the body becoming more dark-weighted. And in these tests show that tissues become more dense, and the drug interactions exacerbate cystic fibrosis. You've got loop types of diuretics, which have been giving like Lastex, and you've got others which truly inhibit even more the cystic fibrotic proper chloride and bicarb channel and exacerbate cystic fibrotic condition more. And you've got hyponatremia, which is loss of salt, and so, you know, all of a sudden you've got potassium coming in more. I mean, this really impacts the brain and the heart, and really, you know, is behind myocardial infarction and things like that, where people die. Cystic fibrosis shows that if you've got altered grey matter density, and when you did a test and it just sort of slowly comes back, and it shows that your T2 relaxation value, where that's red, shows there's brain tissue injury. And it is because you could see undigested fat in the stool. You could see the pancreas really, also small intestine really is sort of impacted to show extraneous internal pressure. And part of the reason why somebody doesn't really want to exercise because after they eat, they've just got an allergy in the abdomen and pain in the upper abdomen, tenderness more. And so it's sort of really the degrees of encephalitis and Winnerx, which is an area of your brain, encephalopathy, and mucus that causes malabsorption, and vitamin deficiencies, dehydration, and heat and cold, lack of any tolerance. an abnormal magnetic element. You've got Staphylococcus aureus and Haemophilus influenza and things like this, and Pseudomonas aerogenes, and all of this is a grey matter density that could show up where scans are done, and you've got this T2 sort of waiting where they're looking at reading what goes on, and where you've got whole brain relaxation. You've got in your own day of being, you've really got a better chance to be able to help where cystic fibrosis is. Otherwise, all these things which is abnormal start to impact and cause people not to be able to be in a proper balance. The cerebellum and hippocampus and amygdala and all these areas, and what controls mood and your cognitive respiration and other things, automatic function, all can be helped, that you look at and you can say, oh, well, yeah, that's right, I've been dry, or I didn't have proper fluid flow like I should, or I've got urinary interstitial because I'm always urinating, or I have a dry mouth, or I feel or look listless. People are not going to say that these are not symptoms of cystic fibrosis. They sure are. You've got chromosomes, chromosome 7 especially, which is the cystic fibrotic transfer regulator protein, and where chloride, magnetron, and bicarb, like we've been talking about, north negative, really become deficient. What are you going to have after that? You don't really have energy flowing like it really should. So cystic fibrosis really impacts kidney, it causes dehydration, amyloidosis, causes amyloid and beta peptide sort of build up, and weakens all the vessels where the brain is, and it's all ever more prone to stroke. And who suffers ever more from encephalitis, obviously, is ever more prone to brain conditions from where they've got cystic fibrosis underneath. Heavy protein complex carbs and fat always will cause someone to just have an allergic effect and get tired and sleepy and not be able to function after that too much in the upper stomach, and cause exacerbation of that condition and wrongful release of somatostatin, like we've been talking about in this program, which blocks the synthesis of amino acids, which we've been talking about also, like phenylalanine. This is sort of one of the reasons for the almond gouda. This is aged over 9 months or more. It's quite extraordinary. 4 grams of that, and you've really got 100% of the recommended daily allowance of what you need for phenylalanine, for instance. It's quite extraordinary. But you've got partial arterial pressure and hypertension and shortness of breath and dizziness, tired, swellingness. And our program really focuses on carbon dioxide, which opens up your cells, and nitrous oxide, which opens up your vessels, and what is going to open up the lymph channels of your brain and this sort of thing, and then vasodilate. But drugs like dilatism, which is a calcium blocker, or nifedipine, which is amphetamines, things, and calcium channel blockers. You've got a whole range of things, which is anticoagulants and decongestants, sort of. And these are all things which truly can be disastrous for somebody who has Alzheimer's and cystic fibrosis, because, like what we just said, is that can't be broken down. If you have a diagnosis proper, it would be because you've got your history corrected. And the history of these things, just like what we're talking about, whether you have a salt test or not, shows that you've got thickened mucus. And if you've got thickened mucus, you've definitely got a variant of this condition. And something must be corrected. The impaired chloride and bicarb channels really not being corrected, but should be, could be. You have a lemon bicarb shot, you have a vinegar bicarb shot, and you bring those things in, and suddenly this is going to help you. So incredible, because it's really what's missing. And so the cilia really keep their surface clean when you do things just like this. You do to do live food, but not when you're eating at a turn at a time, and you're not monophagic in the way that you eat. You're not going to really live a long life if you don't consider these things, for sure. So we live in a day which I don't presuppose that somebody could really have ever heard what this is. I think it's really important that you could pass the information on. How good is that? You've got varieties of aged Gouda, which is so beautiful, and smoked where tomato and herbal pistachio is, fromage and things. The Gouda that's natural, environmental aged, just really got a nice nutty flavour, mild sweet. And as it sort of hardens, it gets ever more crystalline, and it ages, it's really quite tangy, sharp, and aromatic, sort of butterscotch caramelized type of thing. But you've got the fragrant amino acids, you've got tryptophan, tyrosine, phenylalanine, and otherwise, cashew is really bad. Why would you want to make something out of that? You know, you can't survive on cashew, but guess what? Almonds are a very good one to do. It's got everything that you need, and it's really way more alkaline forming than what other nuts are, basically. So otherwise, what have you got but cashew, and then you've got phytate molecules all in that, and you've got enzyme inhibitors and stuff like this, and you've got material otherwise, which is so important, where you're making your cheese out of almonds. You've got fermentable disaccharides and monosaccharides and polysaccharides, which really take a lot more time for someone to be able to have digested, and takes time. And so it's really what's ideal for someone to be consumed of for things, and where cartilage and petition and things like that is, and enzyme resistant is ever more like where the cashew is, it's going to not work as really well. But beta blockers like Resipone and ACE inhibitors and things like this really are rife where blood pressure medications are exacerbate Alzheimer's if you've got cystic fibrosis underneath. So the meaning really that someone has more, where you've got to have more better brain function, focus on having proper metabolism through your life, focus on right food. There really is no evidence of the past of any genius ever existing who was a flesh eater. You've got the meaning really of a better capacity to have not had new toxin or otherwise. You need to be able to clear away that heavy metalloid, unphysiological mineral. Otherwise, it just traps mucus, it exposes all of that, and the heavy metal and the unphysiological salt impacts and causes edema and mucus. And so where you get hooked up to a salt trip and you start to have edema, you've got this condition. And that would be wrong past the point, because that's not going to help you. Where Jubb plasma would for sure, which wouldn't do that, which I'd be cared to bring about for people. But you've got cystic fibrosis, otherwise you've got sticky mucus really blocking the lymph channels, that's the channels in your brain. You've got the alpha and beta and tau sort of plaque types of things that's just going on there that tangle and disrupt and cause a lack of proper neural physiological function and sleep disturbance and other things. And so disturbance at the hippocampal level and short-term memory, these are the things which is really highly likely, you see, yes? Anyway, acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter which connects your brain to your muscle, and this is really big time reduced where Alzheimer's disease is. And what have you got actual material to make acetylcholine from if you don't have proper pancreas function? So the entorhinal cortex, hippocampus, and social behaviour, where reasoning is and things diminishes, and attention deficit disorder and Alzheimer's disease. And why not have a bit of castor oil at night, because it's going to help heal this up after 7 days? Why not have a bit of bicarb lemon vinegar shot like thing and produce lymphocyte that helps moisturise the membranes of your brain and boost your memory and mood? And so you're helping prostaglandin synthesis, and it really is opening up the lymph channels of your brain, activating smooth muscle cells, and you've got prostanoid sorts of receptors and things like this, which has got carbonic acid, and you have hypercapnia, and now you've got substances which open up blood vessels and help relax smooth muscle and things, and you get proper circulation, you see, yes? So glutamine is an amino acid, and glutathione, which ferments in a body that's full of this combo food, that's dead food. And those amino acids all ferment. The nitrogen is just robbed from your body and it's given to neoplasm, which just sucks it towards itself. Cells explode. When you feed them glutamate and glutamine, it's the total fuel that fuels neoplastic conditioning. Processed meats combined with alcohol and glutamate and cysteine and glycine, which is found in all these warrior types of protein mixes and things that people say, hey, yeah, you've got to have this, it's going to help you, and they're going to pump you up with this. It's like so bad. It's the worst. It'll cause all sorts of cancer, like so quick. But if you've got asparagus and Brussels sprout and you've got B7 and B9 and things like comes in through live food, you've got asparaginase enzymes, which really clears away excessive nitrogen and amino acids and things like this. You've got clearing away all the condition of the terrain and getting it back to be proper like it should be. Neoplasm disappears. And you don't have excessive amino acid that would have fed it otherwise. Protein feeds all that stuff. You restrict the methionine and phosphate, which cashew is really high in. And so somebody could be doing things which is just about the same as flesh itself or bean. And so not having egg or beef or anything like that, you don't have that high phosphate, high methionine, which really would have caused the high blood pressure. Methionine attenuates all the liposaccharide and induces inflammatory types of response otherwise, and you've got excessive methylation where macrophage and immune cells are. So folate and choline and betaine and B12 and all these things, B vitamins and stuff, all act as methyl donor where a leaky gut is. What have you got? You don't have like what you have should have proper functioning. No. And so, L. salivarius noplanturum coming in where the Gouda is and things that's like that. You've got life colloid which take time and maturity and come to have blue and red and another flower present within it. And so in the intestine with life colloid and in proper function of the intestine without inflammation, it's really manufacturing everything that's sort of really needed. Otherwise, one really can have lacked and not had the capacity about to fend off irritant and neurotoxin and abrasive particle, you see. And these are the things which should be guarded against if you want your loved ones to be having a longer life. Yeah. So anyway, I think the whole topic a bit, Lukey, that's all to do with impaired chloride transport and that sort of thing, and bicarb, which is really behind cystic fibrosis and that sort of thing. It's sort of really something which we should talk a bit more about in time that comes. But anyway, I think that might be enough for us today. We've interested everybody for 60 minutes of some really good stuff, mate, eh?
Yeah, I think it's, I guess the first chapter of the 5 that I showed you, because it's the title of the exception.
I think so too. Yeah, I think so too. And then little bits of this could be added into the rest of what's there, and that's all good, I think, yeah. So anyway, I reckon go ahead and edit this, I'd say, and I think that's probably good material, yeah. And ask the computer to make sure, well, we have a lot of is, what is. Yeah, is the biggest thing. All right, mate. We'll love you, mate. We'll catch up to each other just in a bit, eh?
All right, looking forward to it.
Love you, mate.
You too. Thanks.
Thank you, man.